Welcome back, csc230 to part 6 of our EX5 Jumbotron responsive. This is the responsive part of it. And what we're going to do now is look at our breakpoints, and we can look at our final that we have here, and we just kind of fix this side here. And what we want to look at now is where we want this to break, where we want it to break from 3 columns to 2 columns, because it does get really narrow, and it gets a little, these columns get, you know, they only fit 2 or 3 words here. So we don't necessarily want them 3 columns all the way over like this. So we want to find a nice spot, and we also might look at the place where this gets real close to there too. So what I'm going to do is kind of just move this around. And remember, I have this this console open in the bottom in Chrome. I'm doing this in Chrome, and there's add-ons that you could put in to help you find the width, but I'm using that right now. And you can see I'm at about like 800 or so, and this probably isn't a bad place to look at that. You might look at like 800. Sometimes 768 is like a common breakpoint that you'll see, and we might do that. Let's see what 768 looks like. And it's getting kind of close there. Maybe we'll try that, because that's kind of a common breakpoint. And to do a breakpoint, what we're going to do is we're going to do a media query, and then we're going to change some things at that breakpoint. And what we're going to change is column A and column B are going to be 2 column, and then column C is going to be 1 column. It's going to kind of stack underneath when we get to this point. So when it gets this wide at the 768, we're going to drop this down, but we're not going to have a gap there. We're going to kind of fill it up. So, and then also what we're going to do is probably drop this underneath here, and we'll have to just alter the styles that we have in our CSS. And this will all be with CSS. And although we will do a little bit of HTML just to kind of help correct some of these things here, because we're now going to have to give these separate styles, because these 2 are going to have a different width than this one if this one goes on the next line below it. So, and we're going to do that by just creating another class, so we don't even have to kind of change the original. So what we'll do first is we'll kind of create a breakpoint, and to do that, the way we do that is we put that at the end of our CSS. We put it down here, the very last thing, and we create kind of a media query, which is basically styles inside. Media query itself is kind of like a style, but we're going to put styles inside of there. So you just have to remember that the media query has its own brackets, and then they still have style brackets inside there. So this is an example. If you go to W3 Schools, you look at CSS, media queries. Here's an example of a media query, and this one has body, background color. It's like a try it yourself, just to see that when the screen gets smaller, it'll change the color. Well, we don't want to do that, but we could copy the media query. So I'm going to copy it right from here and put it right in our code. So I'm just going to hit a return here and just paste it. And there's our media query, and we could change the breakpoint, and we said it was going to be 768, so we'll use that. And we don't need this style inside here, so I'm just going to wipe this out. But we do want these curly brackets here, so we want to keep these here. So everything we put in here, basically when the screen gets to this size, is going to override styles that we have up here. And anything that you don't change is going to stay the way it is. And so you only put the things that are different in your media query. So the first thing we're going to do different with our media query is we're going to kind of address our column issue. So what we have to do is take a look at our columns. Now here's an issue, here's a problem, I guess, is we used .col class to basically represent all 3 columns, but now they're going to have to be different. Now we could say, okay, let's give them different names and call it column 1, column 2, column 3, and we are going to kind of do that, but then we'd have to change this and change this around. So I think we're not going to do that. What we're going to do is we're going to give it a new class, and we're going to give a class called column 1, column 2, column 3, but we'll do it as a second class. And what I mean is we're going to go up into our HTML, and they're still going to have the original class called COL. We're going to keep that, but we're just going to put a space here, and each one's going to have an additional class, and this one will be called 1. And notice I'm putting a space here. This will be called 2, and this one will be called 3. So those will be additional classes, and these will, anything in here will override the first one. So the first one could be general things that they all share, but now call 1, call 2, call 3 will be specific to them. So that's kind of a way that we don't have to override, or we don't have to change our original style that we created for calls. So what I'll do here is, and again, this is going to happen in the media query because nothing's happening right now in a regular HTML. So I'm going to copy this. You know, that way we could keep our call P and that kind of stuff there. I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to go into our media query, and I'm going to paste this. And I'm going to tab these in so that they look a little better. And I'll even tab in our bracket and move this bracket up. And that's kind of the way it should look. That way your brackets kind of line up. Now, what we're going to have now is I'm going to put call1, comma, and dot call2, because those are the kind of new classes we just made. Now, those are going to be two of them. And then I'll even have one. I'll even copy this. And I'm going to have another one for call3. Now, remember, call3 is going to be different than call1 and call2. That's why this one I'm putting a comma, because call1 and call2 will be one way and call3 will be another way. Now, things that aren't changing, we could leave alone. But things that are changing, we're going to address right here. So the widths of these are going to change. They're still going to float, so we can, I could even leave that in there. If they're duplicated, they could stay in there. But what's going to change here is, let's look at column 3. This one's going to be like, let's say 90%. And that way we can basically set it up so that it has, yeah, let's put 10% on the right side. And then for this one is going to be, let's say it's 54. If we're just going to double that up, let's just say it's 54. Or if we're doing 10% here, let's do 10% here. And what's that going to leave us with? That's going to leave us 100 minus 10 is 90. That means these would both be, I guess, 45. So that should work out for those two columns would be 45. This one would be 90. This would be double. And even if, well, we could leave these 3% as they are for now. See how this works. So I'm going to save this. And what we're going to do is just kind of go over here until we get to 768 and see what happens. Almost there. All right. There's 768. And they all went to, well, that looks okay. Although something happened with that. So let's see what happened with that. Oh, one thing we didn't do is this should no longer float. So let's get rid of the float here. That's part of the problem. Column 3 will no longer float. So these two will float next to each other. So let's fix that. And let's go back to 768 again. This is not taking the 90% of whatever we put in there. So let's see what we did wrong there.
2 hours later.
Okay, I found my problem. It was a simple math problem. It's in here in my media query. If I have 10%, that 10% is for both of them. It's for column 1 and column 2. So that's 10% and 10%. That should be 20%. That leaves me 80. So I would have to have 40 here. I was still going over 100% with the 45. So that should be 80 plus 10 and 10 on each side. This should still work out because it's 90 with 10 on the right side. So if I save this and preview it, I'll even refresh it. That should work out. Now column A and column B are next to each other. This one's, you can see they have a little bit more on that side, but now they're lining up. They're lining up with this over here. So that's working out okay. So we fixed the math problem. That's why we take math courses for this. So now we have that added up. So there's only one here, so that's why we could just do 10 and 90 is 100, but we have 2 here. So this is going to be, and I should actually do it by times 2 here for each side, or at least for this one. So this is 20% plus 40 and 40. That's how that one's going to work out. So that's our first thing, but what we also want to deal with at 768 is kind of this nav bar at the top. You can see it's getting real close there. So what we want to do is bump this down. So let's take a look at our CSS and see how we could bump that down. If we go up to the top of our CSS, we could see we have the header, and we have navbar, and that's floating right. And what we're going to do is we're going to kind of take off that float, and then even for company name, we'll probably we'll take off the float of company name as well, because that one's floated left, this one's floated right. So I'm going to copy both of these, and then we'll only leave the things that are going to change. So I'll go all the way to the bottom here, and I'll paste company name, and then I'll tab these in so they look nice. Well, actually, I don't need this, so I'll click on here, and we're not changing the font size, and the width. I think even the width could stay the same. I don't think that's going to matter. But the float is going to be none for company name. That's no longer going to float. That'll be part of HTML flow now. And same thing here. So that's the only one we really need here. Let's leave the other ones just in case something might change, you know, with the margin or something like that. So navbar's not going to float, so we'll put none here. That's what's going to change. If this isn't going to change, I don't need this, but it might, so let me just leave it here. It's not going to affect anything if you duplicate it, but we'll take it away if we don't need it. So let's save that, and let's see what the top looks like as we move over to 768. Should bump underneath, and actually that looks fine. So I think I'm going to get rid of both of those. I think everything's going to be fine. So I don't need the width here, and I don't need the margin here. Margin seems fine, and I'm just going to tab that over. So everything looks okay with that. So everything at our 768 breakpoint looks okay, but of course that's not our only breakpoint, because we want to focus on, and we're not going to do any, we're only going to do 2 breakpoints, you know, after our full size. So we're only going to go to the 768 and get so it looks like that, and then we're going to focus on it being on a mobile device, which is basically going to be basically filling up the space in one column right now. So that won't be that hard. And what we'll do is we'll just copy this media query, just the top line, and we'll put it under here. And actually, let me fix these. You want to kind of keep them in line, so I know this is the last one. And I'm going to put my second one here so I don't forget it. And now these things are all going to change. So let me highlight these and put them in there. Now column 1, column 2, column 3, I think they're all going to be the same now. I think they're all going to be 90%. And actually, there'd be no reason to have the width be 90%. I think that could be 100. Because we're not going to need any padding on the right side. So I think we're going to put that at 100, and I'm just going to copy these or cut these and put them right here and put an extra comma so all 3 will be equal. And I'll just get rid of that, and hopefully we should just have 1 for all 3. If we say that the width of all 3 are 100%, none of them are going to float, so we want to take away, we want to make sure we have float none, so it wipes out the float for the first 2. And then padding, we could leave it at 3%, but we're not going to have, unless we want to put a little more space in between now. Top at 5, now 0, we don't want to have any, so we could put 0 on the right, and maybe we could put 5 here, and then we would have 0 on the left. I could get rid of this, so we wouldn't really have any. And that's what should happen at, and now we don't know the breakpoint, so it's going to be something like probably around 480. It might be a little more than that, but let's check it out. Let's check out our breakpoint. So I'm looking at the number up here when I drag this, and again I still have my inspect open down here, and I'll scroll down a little bit. Now here's where it's 2 column, and I want to figure out when it's going to be 1 column. I'm thinking about, you know, that's as thin as I want these to get. So I'm probably pretty close. Maybe something like around 540. I don't think we have to go all the way to 480. I think that's too tight. I think I might, or maybe even 520. Now let's see what this, that's already over there, so that's fine. Because we don't need these to go real tiny like that. Let's see where we're at right now. We're at around 5. Let's try 540. I think 540 will be good. So I'll stretch it out so my code looks normal. And we'll do this at 540. That's not a big change from 480, but so now this breakpoint's going to be 540, and we're not going to have any space. So let's take a look at it one more time. Try it out. There's our 768. And that's what it looks like there. And also, you know, as we look at this, this has space to the right of it. This doesn't have to have it. We could have really taken that out, and we could have really taken this out too. We don't really need padding to the right side of these. It's not really necessary. Although you don't notice it very much because, you know, you read right to left. So that's not a big issue, but that certainly wasn't necessary. You know, it gets more kind of noticeable at, you know, the smaller it gets. But when we get down to 540, there it breaks, and everything's on 1 column, and everything looks okay. Except we probably don't need this much margin on either side. And even though we have these at 100%, you might say, well, where's that margin coming from? And that's actually coming from, I think, our container. See, our container has a width of 80%. And we could probably, you know, maybe expand that to like 90% at a small size like that. We don't need as much margin on either side, which is kind of what's happening. By saying the width is auto, you know, the width is about 10% on each side. So we'll make it maybe about 5% on each side. So we're going to copy container and throw that in our last media query here. And I'll tab these in. And the only thing I need to change is width. So I could get rid of these because they'll just stay the same. And I'll just make this 90. And that should be a little more readable. We don't need that much space. You know, we want to fill up, we don't want it going to the edge, but we don't want too much margin either. So let's take a look at this, and let's take a look at, we'll drag it right over to our 540. And now that looks a little better. We have less space, and because we used the container one, that affects everything. So it still keeps everything lined up, which is nice. So everything looks okay. We didn't do anything real different with these yet. We didn't set up any links. We didn't use a hamburger menu yet. But as far as responsive, I think this works out pretty good. Other than my math I messed up there. We used 2 breakpoints, one at 768, one at 540, and now on a mobile device, this looks good. So I think we'll stop here with part 6 of our EX5 Jumbotron responsive. Make sure you save both of these files. And make sure you test it out. Make sure everything looks okay. If you have any questions, let me know.